Staking Mondays is a weekly show to share knowledge from key staking industry leaders with our community. And of course, this is all powered by stakingrewards.com. At Staking Rewards, we are helping investors to navigate the landscape of yield-generating digital assets, helping them find the best opportunities to earn interest on crypto. My name is Ken, and I'm very glad to be here and extremely excited to welcome today's guest, Wolfgang Alrecht. He is the co-founder and CEO of Staking Facilities. Now, Staking Facilities operates industry-grade, highly secure physical infrastructure for next-generation blockchains to run on. They offer non-custodial staking services for Proof of Stake token holders and provide essential services for the Web 3.0 ecosystem. They currently have over 2 billion in total staked assets and have paid out over 100 million in rewards to delegators. So welcome everyone to Wolfgang.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and quite impressive numbers there. I'm sure all your delegators are quite happy with all the rewards they've been paid out over the years. So Wolfgang, just to break you in here, a quick icebreaker question. So which crypto project first spiked your interest outside of BTC and Ethereum, and why was that?
Like my first touch point was basically Ripple. It's a weird story, but my flatmate in Berlin, he was working at a big consultancy and they had some pilot project with Ripple. So I got in touch with blockchain through him and then quickly looked at Ethereum. Obviously, this was kind of a game changer for me because, lots of new stuff you could do with ETH. But coming back to your question, what sparked my interest after Ethereum? Probably, I would say it's already Solana, which has its roots in 2018-19. And this was kind of a project that came after and where I realized, hey, this could be super interesting because it makes different trade-off than others.
Yeah, quite interesting. And of course, Solana has risen to everyone's radar recently with the recent surge in stakers, delegators, price appreciation as well. So let's get right into the main core of questions here. And we will actually talk a lot about Solana today. And it's going to be quite interesting to hear your take on some of these questions. So Solana currently has one of the highest staking hardware requirements in the industry. Now, you guys run a node or a validator for Solana. So could you give us your take on this staking hardware requirement?
Sure. I think from our perspective, it's interesting to look at from a validator's perspective because if we look at validators, how they are operated in different networks and look at our role in these different networks, what is pretty clear is that the hardware requirements or the cost of hardware and the cost to operate that hardware is like very small in comparison to the other costs we have as a validator company. Like the main cost factor for us is human attention, basically, and human resources. So it's not like buying a bunch of hardware is not the problem. The problem is like being present in these networks, engage deeply with these communities, build connections and good networks, and kind of stay close to the project on a technical level. Like as a validator, you should, of course, know what is happening in these networks, know the technical developments and stuff like this. So it's more about keeping this context than it is about hardware. And so for us as a company, as a validator company, the hardware Solana requires is not a problem, really. It never has been. I would even say that projects like Polkadot or Cosmos that require you, if you want to really support the ecosystem, not only validate on Polkadot, but also get in touch with all the different parachains, or Cosmos, where you are not only present on the Cosmos hub, but eventually you want to support all kinds of different teams that need you to run a validator instance for, let's say, Kusama, or like lots of different networks are popping off left and right and requiring your attention as a validator. So in the Solana model, we are really happy that we can just buy hardware and we don't have to maintain all kinds of different applications that are trying to build on this. We can just focus on providing a really good service as a validator and teams can just focus on building cool shit. And this is kind of a distinction that we like a lot, because every part can kind of focus on the stuff that they want to do. In the Polkadot model, for example, like projects have to focus on building a validator set for their power chain, for example. They need collators. Same in Cosmos. Like if you are a Cosmos project and you spin it up, you need a bunch of validators that you can trust, and to build this foundation is really, really hard for teams, and it's not their core expertise. So there's a good argument that these hardware requirements for Solana, they really serve a good purpose, and they make things more scalable and take out friction of the whole process of deploying an application on a blockchain. And on the other hand, for the operators to run a really stable service for these dApps. And so we personally like it a lot. I can also understand the downsides, but maybe we'll get to these later.
Yeah, definitely. An interesting perspective that you have is the hardware requirements are almost a positive, and you're really allowed to now focus on building some more cool stuff, which we're going to get into some of the other products that your team works on as well in just a second here. But for the next question here, so do you think Solana and Bitcoin Cash are similar in the sense that they both scale via hardware and thus trade off decentralization? Now, obviously, Bitcoin Cash only requires more storage, and it's not related to the miners, but isn't it kind of the same dilemma?
It's a bit like this. I think if you look at the kind of trade-off spectrum, they certainly go in the same direction. But I would also like to add that Solana is, Solana scalability does not only originate from just beefy hardware. This is like basically the Binance Smart Chain model. It's much more. It's Rust contracts. It's a parallel smart contracts runtime. And for example, the EVM has a model where kind of one contract at a time modifies the blockchain state. Solana is a completely different beast, as it allows for kind of non-overlapping transactions to execute concurrently. So there's not only a hardware side to this scalability question, but also a software side. And it's kind of, you need both in Solana. So the team is doing really good work in making use of that hardware. Like, you can't just throw hardware at something and expect it to get better each time you throw more hardware in it. That's not just how it works. You have to also do a lot of fine engineering and to make use of this hardware. So I think Solana has done a great job in doing this. And so I think it's comparable to Bitcoin Cash in a sense, but also kind of iterates a lot on the kind of technical things we can do with this hardware, and really leveraging this hardware to the extreme, because this is kind of what makes Solana special, I think, and what the team has always said is their goal, to leverage every tiny bit of memory and CPU they can get and bandwidth, and make this kind of maximally efficient, so that all the hardware you throw at it results in more transaction capacity for the users in the end.
Yeah, very well said. And you're someone who knows best, right? So someone from the inside running a validator realizes that the software associated with Solana here really brings out the most efficiency within the hardware that is required. So for you, it's still a positive, and there's not really a big trade-off for decentralization. But now, next question here. So what is the better trade-off for decentralization? Higher staking requirements, like what we're seeing with Solana, or a limited number of validators, like we see with EOS?
I think it's definitely hardware, because the number of validators is kind of artificially capped at, let's say, 21 or something. With hardware, you can just, there's no gatekeeping when it comes to hardware. Basically, every business can buy a validator and spin it up. So there's no artificial gatekeeping. It's just that the requirements to run this are really high. And I also want to point out there is a trade-off of obviously in terms of decentralization, but I wouldn't look for it at the validator side, because as I said, if this thing becomes really big, and most of the global financial activity happens on blockchain one day, and DeFi blows up, and billions of people use this, I think in my view, it's totally appropriate that Solana, like for example, 5,000 validators buy really beefy hardware, and they're sitting in a data center, and it can be decentralized from that point. I think where the trade-off is that regular people will have difficulties running a node, and this has kind of been a core property that makes Ethereum decentralized in this discussion, is that people can run their own nodes, they can validate the state on their own, and by doing this, they can defend against some of these attacks that might be out there, and they can access the network in a way that's way more difficult with Solana. So there's definitely a trade-off here, but I wouldn't say it's on the validator side. I would rather say it's on the user side, because regular users, people like us, they can't run a Solana node at home, obviously, and this is a fundamental trade-off that you make in this model. But I think it's important to point out that there's a distinction between validators running nodes and operating hardware and regular users.
Yeah, great point that you make there. Although it may have more requirements to run a Solana node, it's still possible. It's not, you're not confined to this 21 limit like we see with EOS. So great take there. Where would you position Solana in the blockchain trilemma of decentralization, performance, and security? So compare this to Ethereum 2.0 once it goes live.
Interesting question, and we've been asking us this question ourselves. Obviously, there are lots of unknowns. If you, for example, look at the ETH2 roadmap, it's going to be a way more fragmented ecosystem, I would say. So usually you have the ETH2, and then you have in the roll-up centric model that exists right now, with lots of roll-ups rolling up to this main chain, basically. And by doing so, you kind of break composability a bit. So all of a sudden, you don't have like this one ETH right now that you have, and everybody can use it. But all of a sudden, you have different layer ones with different liquidity profiles and different security risk, and making different trade-offs of their own. So it's really hard to tell how these landscapes will evolve. But I think a core principle in this ecosystem is that a user can node and verify all of these things for himself. So in terms of decentralization and kind of the trilemmas, Solana certainly takes a very different path. But my opinion from the very beginning has always been that I don't want to choose between one or the other. If you look at it as a technology that can help us build cool stuff and build cool things and displace some of the monopolies that are very present in our daily lives these days. If we want to really do that, we have to leverage all the different trade-offs we can make. And Solana's doing a very different trade-off than Ethereum. And I don't want to choose between one or the other. I'm honestly and genuinely convinced that both approaches will bring lots of value, find product market fit, and do really well. It's not an unreasonable thing to believe, so you don't have to apply this one versus the other method. And in fact, if you neglected this kind of tribalism in the last years, you've been doing exceptionally well as a validator and also as an investor. So the market really clearly speaks the language of multi-chain and accepting different trade-offs that will all find product market fit and do great in the long run. So I talked around the outside, but that is kind of how I see this. Clearly, they are better in the Ethereum, and both can have their place in this world, I think.
Very interesting perspective. And for everyone watching right now, we have with us Wolfgang Alrecht, who is the CEO and co-founder at Staking Facilities. And Wolfgang, just to get your opinion on the next question here. So sticking to Solana and Ethereum sort of comparisons, what needs to happen around Solana for them to keep the current traction that they've achieved and not lose relevance in the coming months once Ethereum 2.0 actually launches?
Yeah, so my biggest worry always about Solana was that, you know, with for example, Avalanche or Binance Smart Chain, you have this clear path that you maintain EVM composability, and then you launch something that is maybe slightly better than ETH, and roughly compares to ETH2 maybe. So if you take Avalanche and you compare it to ETH2, on the one hand you have a couple of chains, on the other hand you have a couple of rollups, maybe shards that can also execute transactions one day. So it's pretty similar, right? So you can compare those two pretty well, and you can port over programs from one chain to the other because it's both EVM. And you can do the same with Binance Smart Chain, so it's EVM compatible, and you can run all the stuff that works with ETH there. With Solana, like the biggest worry I always had was, how are they going to build an ecosystem around this? There's a completely new execution environment. You have to write smart contracts in Rust. There's nothing. You have to build from the very scratch. You have to build a foundation, and nothing is there. How is this going to work out? To my absolute surprise, I think Solana is a very livid, like a very alive ecosystem today. So you can use tons of applications. There are lots of great things you can build upon already. So lots of code that you can leverage, lots of the foundations, the wallet side, it looks great. So all this is here now. So this was already my biggest worry. And also you see lots of people writing smart contracts in Rust now. So with Solana, there's no notion of winning over Ethereum projects. For example, Curve or Aave or any of the other big projects, they can't simply port over to Solana. And on the other hand, people can just take their code, fork it, and build something like PancakeSwap, which I don't know, I have no insights into this, but I think PancakeSwap is pretty plain swap of something that happens exists on Ethereum. So and you can just take it and port it over. So you avoid all the copycatters. You really have to build something from scratch. So this has always been the model for Solana. So I think for them to keep to be relevant in the future, they just have to continue what they're doing right now, and the network has to obviously scale and be stable. We had a downtime a couple of weeks ago, so we have to avoid this from the operator side. It's still a very early network, and there's of course risk involved with like with all the others. But I think the biggest worry for me was always the developer ecosystem basically reaching escape velocity. And I think it already has reached escape velocity. So I think the biggest risk factor is already gone, and the market clearly, I think, sees it the same way with the recent surge in price, which brought it from a couple of dollars to almost 230, I think. So I think the market also recognized that this ecosystem building on Rust smart contracts is reaching escape velocity, and the risk is thing blows up and doesn't get any traction at all. It's not there's not a risk anymore that Solana stays a ghost chain or anything like this. I think this is also the reason the market completely wants to see Solana in comparison with all the others.
Yeah, that fear of having Solana as a ghost chain is definitely relevant, right? Where now we see so many different wallets, browser extension wallets supporting DeFi applications. Really, you name it, Solana has it now. So your biggest fear has sort of subsided, and you can see that the traction is clearly taking place. And will they stay relevant? Will these applications continue to evolve, continue to innovate? Will be the question that will remain to see answered in the future. So great take there as well.
And adding to the point of earlier, like those are win-win, because Solana is not leeching EVM solidity developers from ETH, like maybe Avalanche does, taking away attention from Ethereum or anything. like attracting a completely new set of developers, Rust developers, and it's building a completely new ecosystem with no copycats that just on its own feet. And this is just a great add for the ecosystem as a whole. Like if we can onboard a couple of 100 million people in the next years through Solana, it won't hurt ETH. Like it will only make it stronger. So I've been a big fan of thinking this way since the early beginning. I think it's the right way to look at it.
Absolutely. And if anyone watching is a Rust developer, one of the millions out there, take a look at Solana. Maybe it's an easy transition for you to come start writing smart contracts if you know the Rust language. So great point there as well. Now, Anatoly, the founder of Solana, is emphasizing 10,000 validators on the Solana blockchain. However, it seems very optimistic, considering that smaller validators may need to pay a lot for this staking hardware, operations, and voting fees, for instance. Do you think having so many individual validators is feasible for Solana? And what do you think it would be achievable? What would be an achievable number of validators on Solana if 10,000 was not?
I think this number 10,000, I've heard it before, it's something that lies in the distant future. Not, I think, because Solana has these hardware requirements or is costly per se, but it's simply the amount of validators these days in all these networks is simply limited by the amount of operators. Like there are only a couple of hundred or a handful of operators that you can take seriously that really do this as a non-validator infrastructure as a business. And I think the notion that ETH2, that there's a lot of people running validators from home, I'm not sure how true this is. Like the data suggests obviously that the biggest depositors into this ETH2 staking contract, it's Kraken, Coinbase, it's something like Lido, which we are part of as well, and of Ethereum validators through Lido. And I think big exchanges, they stake a ton as well. So I'm not sure how large this number now in the Ethereum ecosystem. It's obviously a lot higher because regular people can just spin up a node at home. But I think this number, 10,000 validators, it's more of a distant future. I'm not sure how distant, but what needs to happen for this, I think, is that this whole space obviously gains a lot of traction. If we onboard 1 billion users into this blockchain ecosystem, and they facilitate economic activity, I think there's an argument to be made that in that case we can scale, and it's feasible to scale the number of validators beyond a certain point, which will be much higher than it is today, just because it will be much more profitable to do so. And also, yeah, if you just think about the fees, for example, if 1 billion people are using these networks, like the economic activity happening on these ledgers is going to be absolutely crazy, and it's going to be very profitable to run validating operations. And I think this will also lead to all kinds of different businesses around the world, small, large size, middle size, spinning up validators only if they like, and if it's only to kind of understand what's happening in these networks or because they have to inject their own transactions. So I see lots of these things in a very distant future. I think right now the space is pretty limited by just the amount of people that have the capabilities and the will to run validators. Right now there are now 10,000 operators that they're just not there. So it's yeah, as I said, it's maybe something we'll get back to in the future, but right now it's just not realistic, I think.
Yeah, good take there. And 10,000 is a nice round number. It's good for marketing materials as well. So I'm sure that has something to play with it. So how much time do you think it would take for someone individually running a Solana validator? And under which conditions would it be a profitable operation for them?
I think you obviously need a bit of knowledge how to work with hardware and a bit of Linux experience, but then I think you can get up to speed pretty quickly from the knowledge side. I think it's also pretty easy in most cities. You can find a small independent data center that will co-locate your hardware. This is something I'm a big fan of. So of course you can go to the big kind of clouds, or there are also like big data centers like Hetzner that have pretty good offers for like managed hardware. But even if you want to run your own hardware, I think in every like mid-sized city you find a local data center, and you can put in your Solana Validator there, and you're basically all set. And then it's just about just about reaching profitability. This of course is the hard question. So I think right now voting on Solana costs you around 1 sol per day in transaction fees, which is, if you extrapolate, it's quite a lot. So you definitely right now need, I think, a couple of thousand sol in on stake, or significantly more in external stake to break even, basically. So it's about rising this threshold. What I meant with lots of economic activity happening on these platforms. If that really happens, people are going to pay transaction fees. These networks are going to get really saturated with demand, and this will allow, I think, smaller operators to pass this threshold of profitability, whereas right now they maybe can't. But the foundation is also doing a good work in Solana. It is, I think, pretty heavily dedicated to supporting smaller validators. So they're doing a great job, I think, in comparison with the other foundations in this space, really focusing on their mission to build up the knowledge and a validator set that is capable of basically expanding. And it's really helping to kind of build a good foundation for future iterations of the Solana blockchain to decentralize even further.
Wow, so some quite surprising numbers that you just gave us there. So profitability for running a small validator, you'd say would be you have to hold around 200,000 USD worth of Solana, something in that neighborhood, in order to break even with the current transaction levels that are happening on the chain. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I would say it's even more. I don't have the exact numbers, but I would say it's even more. It's a big number for sure. But also, if you look at ETH, you have to basically stake 32 ETH. That is quite a lot these days as well. So there are kind of different kinds of requirements for all these networks to participate in as a validator. And my take is that most people they are not really interested in or they shouldn't be interested in doing this. They can be of more help in other parts of the ecosystem right now. I think scaling the validators of chains will become important, or is important now, but the room for this to happen is not here yet, maybe. And I think a consequence of this is if you look at all the ecosystem, if you look at Cosmos, the number of validators that reach 33%, I think, is somewhere between 5 and 10. Same with Tezos, Polkadot is pretty similar. I think Solana is similar. So it's a common theme. It's not like this is, it's a common theme, and I think the reasons are kind of pointing to that as well. So right now we are here, but of course we want to get somewhere else in the future in terms of decentralization and number of entities participating in consensus of these ecosystems.
Yes, it's very valuable insights you're giving here to the audience. People listening that may be contemplating setting up their own Solana node are getting a lot of information from you here. So what direct implications does the increasing stake transition from bigger to many smaller validators on Solana have on your business at staking facilities? And how do you deal with that?
I think validators, like what I love about the space and our colleagues, like validator colleagues, there's this notion of friendly competition. Of course, we're all competing for stake, but we all know that we kind of have to work together to operate this network, and we're kind of sitting in the same boat, like pretty literally. So we're on one team, and what has happened in Solana to us is a big privilege, and we try to keep up with the responsibilities with it. So I'm really happy if we see small validators kind of proving themselves and then getting bigger. So in Solana, for example, there's this awesome guy, Brian Long, and just to give you an example of how this could work, and he in the very early days was just a community validator that I think was interested in Solana. I think had no prior touch points with blockchain, and yeah, now he's running a validator that is called BlockLogic. It's rank 15 right now, and they went from a couple of Sol and stake to a couple of million. And I think people simply rewarded that they're building cool stuff. They're running side-wide contract validator performance. They also run RPCs for projects building on Solana. So they're doing lots of things, and there's definitely a clear path for people to get into an ecosystem, build up reputation, and people will notice and they will reward you for it. So this, I think, is a very good model to approach this. And what doesn't work what doesn't work is simply spinning up a validator and hoping for stake. So why do you think people should delegate to you? This is kind of a question everybody has to answer if you really wants to spin up a validator. There are lots of people and lots of validators, so why you? And I think the answer to this question is always deeply engage with the ecosystem, build something, build a community, and then kind of leverage this to spin up a validator and get stake. This aligns with my argument earlier. If there's more economic activity happening on these ecosystems, there will be all kinds of different communities that can come together and operate a validator or whatever on their own, and kind of together reach this or break this point of profitability. But you kind of can't do it alone. You have to have a bigger plan or some mission. What we see as well is projects on Solana, for example, applications running validators as well. So this could be something. This could be a model. Hey, we're for example, let's imagine Curve Finance or Aave on Ethereum. They would operate a validator that you could delegate to, and maybe this also gives you some benefits in terms of using their application. So there are all kinds of different models that will be explored, I think, in the future, and will make it very interesting how this validator set composes in the future. For us, we love to see it happen. We support smaller validators. We've been delegating stake to smaller validators since the very beginning. Yeah, it's supposed to be.
So that's very nice to hear. I know not everyone in the industry takes this approach, but you guys have gone as far as actually you've been delegating some of your own funds to smaller Solana validators to help them grow throughout their process. And that's really amazing to hear. It's almost philanthropic in a way, but it helps achieve a greater goal throughout the ecosystem. And I think you make a great point when you say it's not just about setting up a validator and walking away. It's about creating cool stuff, right? To keep it SEO friendly, creating cool stuff and really connecting with your community. And that's where a lot of your hours, your overhead is committed to, as well as giving attention and building community, building products within that community, and making sure that the users are experiencing something worthwhile and valuable in the end. So for you, how important are big active validators for layer one blockchains? And I don't mean exchanges, but providers like staking facilities who are not only validating, but also building tooling and educating, exactly like what you do with Solanabeach for Solana. How important is that?
I think validators are I don't want to, it's a bit weird saying this from my perspective, but I think validators are crucial or have been crucial for the early bootstrapping phase of these networks. Like this applies to Solana, but this also applies for many, and I would always say all networks out there. Validators are often the biggest investors, so they buy tokens early on. They run all these test networks. Security-focused validators find all kinds of different bugs in your code base. They make sure that your network once it launches is stable and won't be exploited on the next day. Or they will do their best to avoid this. And so on top of that, they're building stuff like block explorers. They are doing all kinds of different things that make this project a success. And they are kind of the people that you rely on the most in the early days to get up to speed and up and running. So I think that there's a very symbiotic relationship between validators, obviously, and the underlying project. I think they're really important, especially you kind of emphasized bigger validators. So I think bigger validators have the responsibility to put in more and committing more people to different tasks that might look very different. One validator might have a focus on security, another validator builds stuff, the other one is doing great educational material. So there are endless possibilities to engage yourself in the community. But I think it's important that bigger validators live up to the responsibility. So I think they're really important. This might change in the future, I don't know. We certainly noticed, like, once these ecosystems really blow up and there's a lot of applications running on top, you become more of a tech operator of hardware, basically, and obviously your influence in the ecosystem is decreasing, which is also good. I think validators have this big responsibility in the beginning, when these small projects are kind of very fragile and they need care and resources to grow. But once they reach escape velocity, I think validators and their responsibilities, and rightfully so, will decrease. Obviously, there are trends that kind of run counter to that. For example, if you look at minor extractable value or something like this. But I think in general, this is how I see it.
Yeah, and that's truly an insider perspective right there. And for everyone watching, if you guys want to just head over to solanabeach.io and check out the amazing block explorer built by Wolfgang and his team here. I mean, this is basically the leading block explorer for Solana. And we make certain data point calls from their API, and I'm sure other people do as well. So it's a critical part that these big validators are contributing some kind of tooling or educational material or product to the ecosystems they support to help them achieve this escape velocity, like you said there so many times. So great insider perspective there. And how do you think your role in the ecosystem as an active value-adding proof of stake validator will change in the coming years? More or less relevant? And will the core business model for you stay the same or change?
I touched on this a bit in my last answer. I think big trend, I think, is that validators, of course, they lose relevance because other parts of the system, namely the applications running on top and the users using these applications, they obviously become more important, rightfully so. This is how it should be. I'm not saying that you get reduced to this kind of just run your validator and that's it role. I think you can stay very active and build also engage in the ecosystems yourself. So what we're doing on Solana, we're not only a validator, we're also participating in different DeFi protocols. For example, we are a liquidity provider in different DeFi protocols on Solana. So we kind of leverage our capital to help bootstrap this initial liquidity. And we're also kind of users of ourselves, like of our own networks. So it's this is, for example, one opportunity that I think you can engage in. Another one would be a touch on this minor extractable value. So if we really populate these blockchains with lots of economic activity, and if we move billions and trillions every day around, and if we facilitate all these economic activity, minor extractable value is the idea that validators that have the power to order these transactions, that are essentially financial interactions with different programs. If you have the power to order those transactions, you can extract a lot of value out of this, because you can basically say, yeah, this one comes first, this one comes after, or this one pays better, or we just take this transaction and replace it with our own and leave the other one out. So lots of room to extract value there. And I think this will become a topic for validators, where they have to decide how they want to approach this, how they want to, basically, how they want to deal with this in general. It's a very open question, and there's no kind of obvious solution. Lots of interesting approaches and very smart people are working on this. But this is, for example, one topic which will become very important for validators, where I could imagine this runs counter to the trend of validators losing relevance, because this is a very interesting or crucial part of these blockchain ecosystems. Maybe that does mean that we see other players coming in to validate, simply to take their share in minor extractable value or something. So maybe the validator landscape changes dramatically. I don't know. Could be. It's a very open future.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's ever expanding with this minor extractable value topic, and it's almost the topic that we could speak for another hour on, and I'm sure we will in the future down the line. So to wrap up today's interview, we have one final question, and we're going to really try to gauge some insider perspective for you. I know you're very in touch with a lot of projects throughout the entire market. So do you think we've already seen the launch of all big layer one protocols in the market, or do you think there'll be some more new layer networks gaining traction in the coming years? Maybe something you're already working with.
That's a good question. Yeah. If you talk about strictly layer ones, I think we kind of have seen a lot. So the chances that we've seen at least the majority of dominant platforms in the future is very high, I think. And I think we see that something comes out of the woodworks that is just so much better than everything else is shrinking. I think we've pretty much fleshed out the spectrum, the trade-off spectrum, and people have implemented all kinds of different networks, and based on that spectrum, they took different trade-offs and built lots of different things. And now I think is a phase where we've seen all these different approaches, and the market clearly starts to single some approaches out and is telling, hey, this one, people are more confident that this approach is going to stay and be relevant in the future. So yeah, lots of, I think we've seen lots of approaches, and the risk that something comes out and is just very different, and it is small. But what I could see is that the way we basically, what is still unknown is how, for example, ETH2 will look in its final form. And if, for example, a roll-up centric future is becoming more of a thing in the future, and people realize this is the optimal way to scale blockchain computation, I can also see that there will be coming up new approaches. For example, a blockchain that just focuses on data availability and attaches lots of rollups to this. So maybe something like this comes up in the future and proves to be much more convenient for the users. I don't know. Yeah, but on the other hand, coming back to Solana, it's always interesting because they've made this completely contrarian bet. While everybody in their grandma was doing sharding and rollups and fragmenting things into layer 2s and stuff, they took the opposite approach and said, hey, we're going to be this blockchain, and maybe it's a niche, but maybe it's not, but we're going to be this ecosystem that just takes this radically different approach, and we're going to have this one monolithic chain everything runs on. So I think what people like about Solana right now is that there's clarity that, like, no matter what the future will look like, there will be value in this. This is all we can say right now. There might be other things upcoming and the landscape might change, but that doesn't change the fact that this specific trade-off is proving to be really valuable. And right now, if you, I think, want to be on the forefront of things, I think the big trend right now is obviously bridges. We have all these layer 1s, and right now it's insane how much bridges are coming up left and right, trying to solve the problem of liquidity fragmentation and breaking up composability, and basically all this middleware that is needed to make this internet of blockchains a thing. So yeah, it's kind of, I think, where you can be very active and yeah, find a lot of alpha in comparison to just looking for another layer 1 that makes something a little bit different than another thing that already exists. So I think this is where the music is right now, connecting and facilitating intercommunication between all these blockchains. So if you want to really dive into this, I think this could be this is a great topic to explore and to think about. Yeah.
Well, that's just a great way to end it. And I think you've given our listeners, our audience, just tons of information to digest here. And it's been an extremely valuable episode. I know I've learned a lot just speaking with you over the past hour. And everyone listening, again, this was Wolfgang Alrecht, co-founder and CEO of Staking Facilities. Wolfgang, it was just such a pleasure having you here today. I wanted to thank you for coming on. I wanted to remind everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the like button on this video, and be sure to share it around to all your friends. We're also on Spotify. So if you guys prefer audio only, check us out on Spotify, Staking Rewards. And Wolfgang, can you let everyone know how they can follow you or learn more about the stuff you're working on?
Yeah, I think best is probably to check out our Twitter and our website, stakingfacilities.com. You will find everything there. Also lots of educational material and also yeah, things we find interesting on our blog, Medium. Yeah, reach out to us on Twitter if you have any questions. Thanks a ton for having me. It was really fun, and I would love to come back someday when maybe when the dust settles, and I think it would be really interesting to kind of re-evaluate what we've just said about the future of layer 1s and all this, maybe 1 or 2 years, because we can talk a lot, but in the end, we know that reality always hits different, and would be really interesting to kind of look back in a few years and see what happened.
Put it in a time capsule and let's bring it back up in a year or two, and let's see how much of a problem miner extractable value is for the ecosystem.
Exactly.
All right. Well, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you again, Wolfgang. Everyone, please like, subscribe, and share this video. And as always, happy staking. Take care.
Happy staking, guys. Bye-bye.